All right, picking up with question number 19. In the 1960s, the federal government enacted important legislation that supported civil rights. Explain the importance of the following. So the Civil Rights Act of 1964 is the most important civil rights law in our history. And this law legally ended segregation based on race, sex, color, religion, and national origin. For the Voting Rights Act of 1965, this law outlawed any kind of racially discriminatory voting practices, including literacy tests. And finally, the 24th Amendment to the Constitution, this declared the poll tax unconstitutional. Number 20, affirmative action was a result of the Civil Rights Movement. What does affirmative action mean? Basically, this is giving preferences in either hiring for jobs or maybe college admissions to racial minorities and women. The idea is to correct for discrimination these groups have faced in the past. Question 21, identify some of these important terms. So Cesar Chavez was a labor leader and activist. He was the founder of a union called the United Farm Workers, which fought for the rights of migrant Latino farm workers in the Southwest. The AIM stands for the American Indian Movement. This was an activist movement that fought for rights for Native Americans, compensation for lost tribal land, and the honoring of some treaties that Native American tribes had signed with the federal government. The Feminine Mystique is the name of a book by a woman named Betty Friedan. And this book kind of detailed some of the struggles that women in post-war America were facing, some of the dissatisfaction that many of these educated middle-class women felt when they were forced to kind of leave their jobs and go back to being housewives. It sort of put a name to some of the struggles that these people were facing. Letter D, the Equal Rights Amendment. This was a proposed constitutional amendment that would have actually enshrined in the Constitution equal rights for the sexes. This amendment was passed by Congress, but did not get ratified by the states, so it did not get added to the Constitution because of this conservative backlash that took place to this proposed amendment. Title IX, this is part of the Civil Rights Act, and basically this said that any federally funded institution, which includes most schools in the country, must have equal opportunities for both men and women. The impact of Title IX is especially seen in women's sports. Finally, the Americans with Disabilities Act. This was a law that prohibited discrimination based on disability, provided increased access to facilities for people with disabilities, and also expanded the educational rights for students with disabilities. All right, 22, Vietnam. Explain how the domino theory impacted the United States' decision to become involved in the Vietnam conflict. The idea here is if Vietnam fell to communism, then other countries around Vietnam, like Cambodia and Laos, potentially would also fall like a domino. So the U.S. wanted to stop Vietnam from becoming communist with the idea that if they did that, that would stop other countries falling to communism as well. It's an idea of containment. 23, how did the Gulf of Tonkin Resolution in 1964 affect presidential power? So the Gulf of Tonkin Resolution was passed by Congress early on in the Vietnam War after some warships were fired upon. Basically, this resolution gave the president the authority to use all necessary measures to wage the war in Vietnam. This is obviously very broad, and it really strengthened the president's ability to use his power to fight a war. 24, how did public opinion affect the military decisions as the Vietnam War progressed? So over time, public opinion began to turn against the war. And a democracy like the United States, the government has to be influenced by public opinion because people can vote. And essentially, once opinion turned against the war, the government tried to find a way to end the war and get out of Vietnam. How did the Vietnam War affect people's faith in government? So throughout the course of the war, people began to realize the government and the military were lying to them. So at the end of the conflict, people were kind of disgusted with the actions of the military and the government, and it really helped to decrease or hurt people's confidence in the government. Finally, number 25, how did the War Powers Act in 1973 check the power of the president that was given to him in the Gulf of Tonkin Resolution? So the War Powers Act gave Congress more authority over sending the military to fight in a foreign country. So the Gulf of Tonkin Resolution gave power to the president, but the War Powers Act was an act of Congress that kind of checked the executive branch by taking a lot of the power away. So the War Powers Act overall reduced the power of the executive branch, which reduced the power of the president.